This is a topic that has importance not just for academia, but also for all of us who believe in an idea of India that is secular, that is inclusive, and that upholds the values of the modern world of education. Education as a tool for upliftment, a tool for inclusion, a tool for change. For all of us who are concerned about this, what is happening in this country as far as education in general is concerned, and also history in particular, is a matter of very, very grave concern. Why should we be worried about what is happening as far as history is concerned? Dr. Gopinathan, who gave an introductory message for this seminar, talked about how distortions have always happened. Now, yes and no. Why would one say yes? Because there would always be more left to do. So I wouldn't see it as distortion, but there are gaps in history that always need to be filled. But why do we refer to something as a distortion when, in the name of filling in gaps, something that is not based on evidence, something that is actually being cooked up on the basis of some false premises, which is actually rooted very deeply in an ideological logic, that is where we find a problem that is coming in. That is what we refer to as a distortion. So I wouldn't see gaps as being equivalent to distortion. There will always be gaps, and there should be gaps, because it is through those gaps that new histories will come up. New interpretations will come up. We need those new interpretations. We need contestation. Since I am from JNU, which is known for its dissent and anti-national stance on everything according to the Godi media, let me say that we celebrate dissent in academia. We celebrate difference of opinion and contestation, especially in subjects like history. Without that, there is no growth. There is no growth of the discipline. There is no growth of citizenship even, of the nation and its understanding of its identity. So in that sense, we do need to celebrate even the gaps that are there and acknowledge it, but I will not call those distortions. What is it that is happening as far as the ideological distortion that is occurring? And for this, I would like to draw your attention to the kinds of reports that have been coming in the media. Possibly in Kerala, this is not so rampant as it is when we are sitting in Delhi. We have a lot of, they are literally Godi media. We do not see anything which is not catering to the mainstream or to what is the center's political agenda as appearing in the media. So we can have conferences like this, they will not even appear on page 6. But what is it that they do post about a lot all over every page? There was a book release function of somebody, and one of those non-historians who passes off as historians, one person called Sanjeev Sanyar. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's supposed to be an economist. If you look at his profile, he was a banker located somewhere, I don't know, in Malaysia or Singapore or somewhere. And then he is part of the RSS and joined the Modi campaign, and then has now moved completely into the political arena. And he's the chief economic advisor. He's an advisor on various things. He's also now become a self-proclaimed historian. And so at this book release function, amongst the many distorted histories that this gentleman has written, you have the Union Home Minister who has gone to release this book. And he says that Britishers left India, But history was written through their prism. The confusion persists still. I don't know how much Mr. Shah has read, but possibly has not read much. That is why there is so much confusion. Anyway, in another place, he goes on so then he tells people in that gathering that all those who are students and teachers of history, you should go and search for 300 people who made India a great country. Apparently a gap. So this is what the ideologically propelled scholars, if we can call them scholars, keep talking about unsung heroes. Nobody has sung about them. They are unsung heroes. So what happens is, when we consider the gaps and the distortions to be the same, we are not recognizing how insidious this kind of commentary, this kind of projection is. So they talk of these unsung heroes, and so Mr. Shah says, let us search for 300 people who have made India a great country. Why only 300? Why not 1,000? Why not 3,000? I mean, a population which is touching 2 billion, surely we can find many more. Why that number? We don't know. I mean, it's the greatness of Mr. Shah. We cannot comment. Then in another book release function, he says, people say history has been distorted till date due to various reasons. But now, nothing can stop us from writing it in the right way. I emphasize, in the right way. He also said, in line with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's intention of getting rid of any remnants of the colonial past, the most important is freeing history. Veer Savarkar tried it for the first time by calling the 1857 revolt as the first war of independence. And then, of course, the lackeys, the self-professed historians like Vikram Sampath, write monographs, many volume monographs on Veer Savarkar, apparently filling the gaps. Apparently, Savarkar is one of our unsung heroes. We have all studied Savarkar. So when we have studied Savarkar, we also know about a letter of apology that he wrote. We don't choose and pick what we want about our heroes. They are heroes, but they also have clay feet. As historians, I definitely am not interested on whether they are heroes, whether they are villains, whether they have clay feet. I am interested in looking at, if we are looking at individuals, in context. In a context where people were giving up their lives for the freedom struggle, where they were spending years of their lives, at the peak of their lives, incarcerated, in jails. Somebody writes this abject apology to the colonial government asking to be released. Of course, one understands the conditions in jails were terrible. One can understand it. But we also have people who did spend that many years. So when we place them in context, why do we not see Savarkar in the same way as we see others who spent many, many years in jail, who suffered all kinds of depredations? It is that context. It is not ideology. But where is ideology coming in when we have Vikram Sampath, who is backed by the ministers and the great people who rule this country today, who are saying that these are unsung heroes? The leftist historians, the historians in general, have actually marginalized them, have left them out of the pages of history. That is wrong. That is incorrect. Anyone who has any understanding, even textbook level, of understanding of history, they will know that this is not the case, that people like Savarkar have been recognized for some of the great contributions they have made. Equally, some of the acts that they have committed which have not contributed or not been in favor of the greater freedom movement, this has also been recognized. That is what the historian does. And unfortunately, the projection that has been coming in largely in these kinds of writings of the non-historian in the garb of the historian. So it is like the wolf in sheep's clothes. That is where we need to think of how this kind of understanding is emanating. Now, I want to draw your attention to something that happened a century ago, almost a century ago. And this is Nazi Germany, because that is where we get our first very visible example of what state-sponsored propaganda in the garb of history looks like. And in Nazi Germany in 1935, Heinrich Himmler, I think many of you would know him. He was the head of the Gestapo. He was also running the security services. He was one of the right-hand men of Adolf Hitler. He founded this organization called Ahnenarbe, which in literal terms means Ancestral Heritage Foundation. It was an Ancestral Heritage Foundation. That was the name of the institute. The term itself means something which is inherited from our ancestors. Now, what was this purpose behind the institute? You already had in Germany some modern institutions that had developed from the pre-modern institutions, like in other parts of Europe. But what was special about this particular institute is that the purpose was to look at Germans' identity in the present through the identity in the past. So looking back into the past to read this unilinear identity formation of the German race. The idea of the German race is something that they were trying to project through this institution. It claimed to be using scientific methods. So you had all kinds of things. Today we talk of DNA analysis, I'll come to that in a little bit. But it claimed to be using all kinds of scientific methods which were known and which were very, very cutting edge at that point of time. So that was what was being used, and what happened was a large number of archaeologists, especially archaeologists and historians, were brought in to talk about the ancient period, the prehistoric period, even hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers had to be German and Aryan. This had to be proven. Okay? How you are going to prove it? I don't know. Maybe the tools they made were better tools than what somebody made sitting somewhere else. But nevertheless, you have this kind of an agenda-driven institution, and on Hitler's 50th birthday, I think, or was it 45th birthday? I'm forgetting. But on this occasion, Himmler wanted to present some of the work that had been done in this. And what does he use? He uses Hitler's own ideas that were there in Mein Kampf about how in the world, in the shaping of civilizations, there were three essential groups. One were the founders of civilization. The second one were the bearers of civilization. Static, not. Then the third were the destroyers of civilization. For Hitler, the Aryans were the founders. The Jews were the destroyers. I don't know if it comes to your mind But I can see a resonance. I can hear the pattern, the sound of similarity in what is being done as far as Indian history is concerned. Who are the bearers of Indian civilization? Who are the destroyers of Indian civilization? The erasure of the Jews, the distortion of their history within the German history, within the German lands, the contribution of the Jews to the rich synthetic culture in Germany over the ages, all of this was sought to be brushed aside by this institution and also by so many others who just by their silence added to the cacophony that was coming out of separation, of distortion, of erasure in German history. This is something that is frightening, it is disturbing, because what immediately comes to mind is what is happening in the case of Indian history. There is an attempt to glorify Hindus and Hindu history, which is understood to be Indian history, and an attempt to vilify particularly Muslims, which is seen as something that the Muslim presence and identity is seen as coming in the medieval period, and therefore to erase the medieval period. So this is the agenda that we see in so many ways that is being pushed by the government in power just now. And to understand this, I would like to draw your attention to the institutional ways. We were talking of Annenberg, which is the German institution. Here, we don't have a separate institution. Every institution is being converted into this, where they are trying to show our ancestors, ancestral foundations of Indian civilization and culture. So, what we are looking at is, in the name of state interventions, a Bharatiya Karan that is being talked of. Now, across the board, when you look at the policies that are being pushed by the current dispensation, they are talking of a Bharatiya Karan. What is this Bharatiya Karan? If we were to look at some of these institutional interventions, we have the NEP 2020, I think one of the best examples of how an agenda can be pushed, and in the name of gaps, please excuse me for constantly referring to it, but I'm just using it to flag this issue, but in the name of these things not being covered previously, how they are actually pushing this agenda of exclusivity, exclusive Hindu identity, which is an Indian identity. Christians don't even figure, okay, in their, because their primary narrative is actually a colonial narrative. It is one which comes from the European colonial mindset, where the history of the Crusades had always bothered the historians, academics, administrators, public. So this Islamophobia that we are looking at today, it has its own dimensions across the world. But when we actually look at the European context, historically in the 19th, 20th century, when you have these academic bodies and disciplines that are coming up, this Islamophobia gets entrenched. And it is drawing upon that history, that memory of the Crusades, and is bringing it in. And so, in the colonized regions, also, they were trying to project, because one of the ways in which you colonize and understand the area that is colonized is by trying to look at their history, the history of the colony. Now, how do you look at the history of the colony? You are using frameworks which are alien to the colony. And it is there that the same mindset is actually brought in, and so interesting that those who want to do Bharatiyakaran are actually using that colonial mindset. They are using that colonial framework. So you have the parliamentary committee then on education. The NEP, Dr. Malavika Binni will be speaking on it, so I will not go further into detail on that. But where you can see very clearly that it is a Hindu and Sanskritic identity that is what is being projected. All great knowledge was already there. Everything was already there in the past. And there's some things in the modern period. That also they say, some few things in the modern period. But if we really want a holistic education, we need to go to the past. Because everything was there. And so I'm not going to go further into that. But the other document that is very, very important for us, the other institutional tool that was used, is through the Indian Parliament, where matters of education are discussed. You have a parliamentary committee on education, women, children, and youth and sports. And this was mentioned by Professor George Joseph, that in 2020 began its deliberations. We got to know of it. Newspapers caught this only in early 2021. What were they deliberating on? The subject being reforms in the content and design of school textbooks. Why are they deliberating on this? Because they are removing references to unhistorical facts and distortions about our national heroes from the textbooks. Now, mind you, in the textbooks, there is no reference. In case, our ideologues were worried, they should just read. There is no reference to Savarkar's apology, just to clarify. So there is, so they want to remove any distortions about our national heroes and reference to unhistorical facts. What are these textbooks? They were talking about the NCERT textbooks, and their concern was obviously primarily with the social science textbooks. They were also very bothered about the political science and sociology textbooks because there are references to caste. How can you talk about caste? You are spoiling the minds of young children. They are so innocent, they don't know caste. So I'm a Dalit child, I don't know caste because I'm innocent. I live in abject poverty. I see that I am constantly reviled because of my caste status, because of being Dalit, but I don't know caste because I am so innocent. Right? We are all in society, this is all the Garden of Eden that they think we are living in. So they say we don't want these kinds of references. In history, what are their problems? These unsung heroes. Then the other thing they're talking about is ensuring equal or proportionate references to all periods of Indian history. What do they mean by that, all periods of Indian history? We have textbooks for ancient history, ancient India. We have a textbook for medieval India. We have a textbook for modern India. We have a textbook for world history. Ancient, medieval, modern. Ab aur kya? What else do you want? What is that equal, proportionate references? What do we mean by proportionate? Same number of pages? How do we quantify that? Okay, so we'll come back to that. And the third thing is highlighting the role of great historic women achievers, including Gargi, Maitri, etc., etc. Yeah? And so this is actually very interesting. A party whose ideologues are known to be very gender insensitive, who protect the molesters of the wrestlers who have won medals for India, who are accused in rape cases, whose judges say things like you cannot abort a child to a rape victim because go and read Manusmriti on how women should behave. This kind of an ideology that this dispensation holds, they are talking about gender sensitivity. And many of these books they are talking about have been written by some of the greatest scholars who have fought for the recognition of gender history. Like Kumkum Roy, like Uma Chakravarti, like Tanika Sarkar. In different ways as advisors, Kumkum Roy was the author of the Ancient History book and chaired the committee of scholars. But others were part of the advisory board. These are stalwarts as far as gender history in India is concerned. And we are told that, no, actually there's a lacuna. What is that lacuna? Because the great women achievers like Gargi, Maitri, etc., are not there. Now, Indian History Congress, at that time I was the secretary of the Indian History Congress, when we learned of this notice that was issued by the Rajya Sabha Secretariat asking the general public and institutions to send their responses. So this was the agenda. Why they came up with this agenda, they don't tell us. How they came up with this agenda. So obviously we understand how it came up. We know for how many years the RSS has been talking on similar lines. They have been talking of Macaulay, Marx and Madarsa as being the drivers of Indian history. All the left historians, left liberal historians are supposed to be children of Marx, Macaulay and Madarsa. There is a book actually that is edited by Dinanath Batra titled this. And so we know where this is coming from, the agenda. So we decided to give our response, and honestly speaking, that's the first time, I mean, when my children did study, they studied in a CBSE system, so I had to look at the NCERT books. But I didn't look at it that carefully. I actually looked at it very, very carefully for this exercise. What we did was we went line by line to see heroes, unsung heroes, and women, and periods. How much reference to what period. And we found on every count, it was a lie. Every count, it was a lie to say that different sections of society were not represented, women did not find representation, only the national leaders were finding a place in the books, that regional or local heroes where it is possible, obviously. There is no dearth of great heroes. That's why I said, why did Mr. Amit Shah come up with 300? No, actually we have many more by that standard. But there is also a limit to what you can put into a textbook. There's a logic to what you put into a textbook, and there are pedagogical issues and other issues that we need to keep in mind. So at any rate, we sent in our response. We are mentioned in the final report as having sent our response. But obviously, this is an agenda-driven document, and so the final report is also agenda-driven. It reiterates everything, saying this was our agenda and yes, this is what it was. And it gives you all kinds of nonsense, that 20,000 responses we got. If you look at their report, you will see actually the bulk of the responses are by individuals who are clearly, they are lettered. Okay, they know how to. Aksharam theriyam. Adukku mele onnum varadhu. Beyond that, there is nothing. Obviously, the language they use, the complete lack of historical awareness that they have, you can see it is all mentioned in their report. In an appendix, all the questions they received. Complete nonsense, utter nonsense. So anyway, we are not bothered about that. But what we are bothered about, they say we consulted the CBSE and NCRT, and then state level organizations like Maharashtra State Bureau of Textbook Production and Curriculum Research and SCRT Maharashtra. Why? What is exceptional about Maharashtra? What about the other states in the country? This is education for India. Why only Maharashtra? The other thing is, they are telling us 7 private organizations and 4 subject experts also came and deposed. Who are these subject experts? J.S. Rajput, who was the former director of NCRT during the NDA regime 1, when Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. Mr. Rajput used to say, I'm a worshipper. So one lesson they have learned from history, bhakti. Ellarum bhaktaral. Okay, so he is a bhakt of Murli Manohar Joshi, the HRD minister at that time. He used to say it in the newspapers himself. It is reported. So Mr. Rajput is one of the people. Is Mr. Rajput a historian? No, he is not. Then the other persons are NCRT director and some other SCRT director, I think. I'm forgetting the other. So they are institutional heads. They are not subject experts. How misleading the document is. And who's the 4th person? 4th person is a very interesting person who is a former MP called Hukum Narayan Yadav, who represented Bihar several times, I think 4 times. He was rewarded with Padma Bhushan also. So he's very much a BJP person, and one of those who was instrumental in laying roots for the BJP electorally in Bihar. So he is the subject expert. Okay? No historian over there. The 7 non-governmental institutions, 5 of them are RSS institutions. Nothing, you just Google. That's all. I mean, there's no need to even, they don't even try to hide it. 5 of the institutions of the 7 that gave their responses to this parliamentary committee are RSS institutions. So, this is distortion, sir. It's not filling in a gap. It is a distortion. Now, the other organization is the NCRT. And again, when we look at the NCRT, we saw, right from its inception in 61, we have, so one of the allegations that Mr. Dinanath Batra, he was the one who spearheaded the education wing of RSS for several decades. He used to constantly say, all these left liberal historians, they are getting money. They are forcing their way and writing these textbooks. No, they have hegemony. Actually, when you look at the history of the textbooks and how they came to be written for NCRT, in 1961, this NCRT comes up and then they constitute panels for different subjects to decide who will write the textbooks. Panel for history had Tara Chand, a great nationalist scholar and historian, but also in terms of his historiography, very traditional historiography. Great men, great events, that kind of history. He is the chairperson of that committee, K. Neelakanta Shastri, doyen of history, no doubt. But still, there are limitations to the way in which he wrote. Age of 3 empires, clash of 4 empires, rise of 1 empire. That's the kind of history. Kings, battles, dynasties. Muhammad Habib, another great stalwart, medieval history. Visheshwar Prasad, B.P. Saxena, and P.C. Gupta. All of these are good nationalist scholars who came into the limelight in the first half of the 20th century, in the 30s and 40s, already well known, well established scholars. They commissioned Romila Thapar and Bipin Chandra to write the textbooks. Just to clarify that this canard that is circulated, that these historians went and grabbed these things, right? We all have so much of time, no? So that we say, come, give me more work, give me more work. Textbook writing is one of the most difficult tasks. And these people were approached and they wrote textbooks for, Romila wrote for ancient, Professor Thapar wrote for ancient and medieval India, and Bipin Chandra wrote for modern India. And then in 66, this board was reconstituted. It had Sarvapalli Gopal as the chairman. You had Nurul Hasan, Satish Chandra and Romila Thapar on the board now. And then R.S. Sharma, Satish Chandra and others were asked to write textbooks. Okay, so this is a process that involved consultation. It involved a broad cross-section of scholars. It is not something where people were going and grabbing whatever they wanted. Yeah, it's not like some cuddler that you're going and picking off the road, off the vendor. So people actually already had earned a reputation, and so they were being asked to write these textbooks. Now, I'm not going to go further into this except to say that, you know, in 2000 itself, there was an effort with the first NDA to alter the textbooks, to bring reforms in textbooks. And you had a new curriculum framework that was brought in. And there was, the taking away of these textbooks. And at a very short notice, new textbooks were introduced. These were written by people who taught history, some of them, who were the authors of these books. But I would not say that they were very well known for their scholarship. It's okay, we don't need to know every scholar. That is also true. But we don't know of their scholarship. Let's put it like that. Somebody should know of their scholarship. We don't know of their scholarship. There was nothing out there which was of an academic standard that we could refer to. Very poor textbooks. And then with the new government coming into place in 2004, then again those were withdrawn, and then you have this new set of textbooks. So this attack on textbooks is a very, very important part of the propaganda of the state, because as we know, it is through textbooks that ideologies can percolate. That is a correct point that is made by the ministers and by Mr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, who headed the parliamentary committee on textbooks, that we want to instill certain values. The point is, what kind of values? Are these the kinds of values that were envisaged by those who fought for India's freedom? Were these the kinds of values that, as a community of scholars, we agree upon? Clearly, because we are not even consulted, a large number of us, this is something that is a false statement. It is not coming from the reality. So what do we have in the NCERT textbooks then? In the name of COVID, first, because already the textbooks have been in preparations, we are told, by our sources. We still have sources, fortunately, and we are told that there are textbooks in the making, the new textbooks with this kind of distortion and Bharatiyakaran that is happening. And so you have Mughals being removed, some parts of colonialism being removed, the discussion on Central Islamic lands. Why should we only study Europe when we are talking of Western history or the world history? Why not look at West Asia? Why not look at North Africa? What are the developments happening over there? The part on confrontation of cultures, which is on the early colonial encounters, Latin America, Southeast Asia, these are the examples that are axed. So we can always debate as historians whether I will prefer to have colonialism in Southeast Asia or I'll prefer to have colonialism in South Asia shown in the textbooks and so on. As historians, we can debate this. But what is happening over here is it's just completely removed from the textbook. And what is the excuse that is given? The excuse that is given is that we are doing this for the benefit of the students. We want to lighten the school bag. You want to lighten the school bag and put a gunda on the head. Right? You want to really kind of crush them in terms of the ideas that you are giving them. A sectarian idea, an exclusivist idea, a sense of history where there is only a certain kind of Indianness to that history. That is where the problem lies with what the NCERT has been doing. A third thing that I want to flag for you is the UGC courses for history that were proposed in 2020 itself or 2021, I forget the exact date, but you have a model kind of course structure. Unfortunately for us, many institutions across the country have uncritically accepted this recommendation. It is a recommendation. I think a lot of us don't even read the fine print. Something has come from the UGC, oh, let's do it quickly, otherwise our funds might be stopped, and so on. So this fear psychosis that builds up. And so you have these courses, very shoddy, of a very poor academic standard. Let me give you the first course, which is supposed to be their flagship course. They think of it. They claim it is their flagship course. What is this first course? Idea of Bharat. That is their paper 1. And in that course, as a historian or a scholar, I think many of us do that. First, I always look at the bibliography. So when you look at the bibliography, what do they have? Satish Chand Mittal, Bharatiya Sanskriti ke 4 adhyay. Have you heard of it? Have any of you heard of it? See, you all are not part of RSS. Because that is published by Akhil Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Yojana, which is an RSS body. The other work is Shri Arvind, Bharatiya Sanskriti ke Aadhar. One more is Bhagava Dutt. Bhagava, you know the meaning of that. Bhagava Dutt, Brihad Bharat ka Itihas. Then one more is Vedon mein Vigyan. One more is Bharatiya Sanskriti. Then something called Drishtavya Jagat Kayatarth. I mean, really. And random dates of publication. Some are very recent, 2018. Some are not dated, etc. And then they have some Hindi works that are cited by historians, by scholars. At least we know their names, okay? I mean, I suppose, I felt so relieved. And that is Govind Chandra Pandey, G.C. Pandey. Irrespective of our differences politically, I think G.C. Pandey was a good scholar. He was a scholar. Okay? He looked at sources. So I call him a scholar. And his work on the origins of Buddhism, I still recommend to my students when I am teaching Buddhism. I don't agree with a lot of things he says there, but he's a scholar because he has looked at the original sources and has tried to understand it within a historical framework. So G.C. Pandey is mentioned. V.S. Pathak, again a good scholar. V.S. Agarwal and Rajbali Pandey, all of these scholars have worked on either religion or art. They're good scholars. They've looked at sources and so on. They have excellent publications in English. Why they have cited only their publications in Hindi, I don't understand. This is a UGC model syllabus. That means it is meant for people, for colleges across the country. Why is it in Hindi? all these works, then they should include something in Malayalam, something in Tamil, something in Gujarati. Why is it only in this language? So obviously very shoddy, very limited understanding. And other works that are cited are A.L. Basham, The Wonder That Was India, and A.S. Altikar's Education in Ancient India. And then Dharampal, I don't know if you remember Dharampal, Gandhian scholar who also then was with the NDA government. Now, Dharampal's Beautiful Tree and so on, such works that are mentioned. Now, if you look at these works, some of these are 1806, published in 1806. Indian Antiquities by Thomas Morris. Okay. Then there are very funny bloomers like this work of R.K. Mukherjee, Indian Shipping. It's mentioned for Idea of Bharat, okay, this course. And the book is actually published in 1912. But they show it as published in 1995. I checked and I found that a reprint had come out in 1995. So it's that shoddy a work. Full details. Yeah, Radha Kumar Mukherjee. And also that wonderful work of R.K. Mukherjee, which is Fundamental Unity of India. It's a good book. I have no doubts about it. But so much more has happened since then. Since 1912 and 20s and 30s. Where is that in the bibliography? So it's dated, and what is more recent is absolutely shoddy and coming from a certain ideological position. It's not coming from historians. So clearly what we see is, in this manner, a very limited knowledge of what constitutes history or the teaching of history. How curriculum should be made, how syllabus should be made. That is why in textbook committees always they try to get people who have taught. Not those armchair scholars who, we like our William Dalrymples. Nowadays they become better scholars in the media than scholars who have worked on those time periods. So it is Manu Pillai, William Dalrymple, somebody else, whom we always want to refer to. They won't call us. So the problem is that when you do go into a classroom, you know how a curriculum should be made. And that obviously these people don't know, because they've only been sitting in their shakhas and in their RSS gufas. So this is a great problem that we see in the way in which these institutions like UGC, NCRT, etc., Parliament are being used to propagate a very sectarian kind of agenda. And ICHR is the premier body for funding of the history departments, history research, holding of seminars and conferences. We know what has been happening over the past few years. Even some amongst us have been forced to invite people who are member secretary, etc., in the ICHR. Otherwise, we won't get funding for our conference, right? And those of us who don't do that, we don't get funding at all. So the point is that we know that there has been a major saffronization. Unfortunately, we all may have colleagues, people whom we have known, who are actually sitting there now and who are busy agreeing to everything in such a hurry. They want to show that they are better supporters of saffronization than the earlier saffronizers. So they're in such a hurry to do things. So when this G20, even before the G20 thing was, presidency was going to be taken by India, there was already talk about how we need to present Vishwaguru. We are Vishwaguru, India. So how do we present ourselves as Vishwaguru? So we have to talk about our ancient Indian history and so on. So there's a project underway. I thought this project started last year. I was mistaken. I looked at the annual report of ICHR and I saw in 2019 itself they have begun work on this. And they come out with this. It's a multi-volume work called India, the Mother of Democracy. The chairman and member secretary of ICHR are the ones who are editing these volumes. And let us see what are their volumes. First is Historiography and Rationale of Comprehensive History of Bharat. Second volume is Dawn of Bharatiya Civilization till Mahabharata period. I mean, we long ago gave up things like Vedic age, Mahabharata age, something age, Buddha age, and so on. Periodization is no longer talked of in these terms. And this relates also to why there is a problem, fundamental problem with the idea of heroes and heroines in history. History is not about heroes and heroines. History is about people in the plural. History is about society. History is about economy. History is about political economy, about changes in the state. And that is something that obviously these people have no awareness of. So almost 70, 80 years of vibrant scholarship of this kind on society, economy, culture, which is broad, which is about people, not about individuals here and there, Rajas and Ranis, or some saints. They are important. I'm not saying they are unimportant. But equally important and more important is for us to look at the mass of people who may not be named in history. And so anyway, we have till Mahabharata period. Then we have state and society till Gupta period. Then post-Gupta period till 1191 CE. 1191, okay, that's the date. Then the volume number 5. The age of resistance. The age of resistance in brackets 1191 CE to 1674 CE. Please understand, this is not filling in the gap. This is distortion with a political agenda. This is ideological distortion that is taking place. It is not the historian's ambit, within the historian's ambit. And then it talks about becoming sovereign and emergence of new Bharat. From 1947 to 2021, even in contemporary history, we don't bring it up right till the present. We leave a gap of at least 10-15 years because it is more difficult as historians for us to sift through the sources. At any rate, even if we were to bring it up to 21, we know why till 21. Why are we coming up till 2021? Right? Because all the great strides were not made in the previous 70 years. It is all made only now. So obviously we have to bring it up to 2021. So this kind of an agenda-driven history is something that we see throughout. And I think that amongst the many ways in which a propaganda has been built up is by talking about, forcing these fake narratives to become our talking points. So even in seminars, unfortunately, we are forced to talk on these issues. The fake narratives of Gandhi versus Ambedkar, of Nehru versus Patel, of Nehru versus Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. They had differences. Scholars have written about them. They also had points where they agreed. That also scholars have pointed out. Yeah? And they were all a part of the freedom struggle that also scholars have pointed out. But this is built up as a great narrative of confrontation and contestation between these figures. Why? Because these are people who don't understand the meaning of historical context. They only understand heroes. That's all they want. And the other thing that they talk about is this foreign rule and regionalized history that is marginalized and so on. But I think that two ways in which they push this kind of an ideologically driven understanding of history is by talking about the Aryan race. So they are using that colonial historiography which talks about the Aryan question. They claim to be coming out of colonial history, and they claim that the left liberal historians have followed the colonial trajectory, whereas actually it is in the works of scholars from the late 40s onwards that we find the repudiation of the race theory very, very strongly. And the new evidence that is cited through archaeological excavations, through a careful understanding of literature. So scholars like Michael Witzel or Stephanie Jameson, Joel Brereton, these are some of the great Sanskritists who in recent times have been looking at the Vedas and trying, especially the Rig Veda, and trying to identify the different strands or the different levels within the text. The texts themselves are layered. How do we find out that texts are layered? We can through the language as well as through the content. And so it is common understanding now that books 2 to 7 are early books of the Rig Veda. 10 and 1 are clearly much later. 8 and 9 are compilations of somewhere in that intermediate period. So, and there are dates that are given and so on. And when we look at this content of the Rig Veda, which is the earliest text that we have, we find that there are references to Dasa, Dasyu, Panis, and these are not racial categories. They are people with whom there are contestations about territoriality, about culture. So they are referred to as Mridravach, uncouth speech. Yeah? And the Aryas are the ones who have good speech, noble speech. Then sometimes there are references to them as being akarmant. That is, they do not perform. Perform what? Rituals. The Vedic sacrifice. That is the culture of the... So this is how we understand, this is how we read the text very carefully, and we come out with what are the differences, contestations. Yes, there are differences, but then we also have instances where a Dasa king is being praised in a Tanastuti, saying that he is so benevolent, he is so generous, he is giving us so many gifts. What does it mean? It means assimilation is taking place. It's not that Arya and Dasa are permanent categories of difference. There is assimilation taking place. Within the text itself, certain words have been identified as being of non-Indo-European, Indo-Iranian, Indo-Aryan type. And that again is seen, some of them are seen as coming from what would be the Dravidian tradition. There is even Mundari. There are other language groups to which they belong that have been identified. So clearly assimilation is taking place. So this idea of Aryan exceptionalism that is pushed, and of Indians today being the descendants of those Aryans, the great Aryans, is a false idea. It is a self-representation. These are texts that are written by the Indo-Aryan speakers. So in all self-representations, there are very few people who can write about themselves self-critically. And especially in pre-modern times, it's a laudatory exercise and so on. So this is something that we find in the text. The other thing that is being pushed is the idea of Hinduism as being the core religious cultural identity of the people in India from ancient times. And so the idea of the Hindu is something that is projected backwards. And it is associated with the composers of the Vedas. That the religion, the Vedic religion is actually Hindu religion. That is where it begins. Now, many scholars have written about it, like D.N. Jha and others. So I don't want to go into it, but very clearly what is a term that is Indus or Hindu, that is used to refer to a geographical entity, a geocultural entity, in the colonial period gets reinterpreted and presented and circulated widely as a very well-formed religious identity. And they use that religious identity and project it into the past. So again, a colonial construct is being used to present this kind of a picture of Hindus from time immemorial. So one very great scholar, she was unfortunately, she also visited my department last year, I think, or during COVID, from the US, a scholar called Lavanya Vemsani. In some Twitter post, somebody forwarded this. She says, Hindus, we go back to 80,000 years ago. This is the historians. These are the historians. There is just no historical content or validation to these kinds of loose statements that are coming out. Your location in the Western academia or in the power enclaves doesn't mean that we are going to accept what you are saying, because there is absolutely no historical basis for these kinds of claims that Hindu identity, Hinduism goes back to 80,000 years, it goes back to 10,000 years, it goes back to 4,000 years, even 2,000 years. Because the idea of the Hindu, as it evolves, as I said, is primarily a geo-cultural understanding. It is only gradually that some religious connotation also comes in, but even then it is only in a restricted way. So you have Vijayanagara kings who say Hindu Raya Suradrana, who are calling themselves as Hindu sultans. Why? Because there is a context in which there are non-Hindu sultans. So they are projecting themselves. So without further elaborating on this, I will wind up, but I want to end with how further non-historians are projecting these fake narratives in the public realm. This is a calendar that was brought out by IIT Kharagpur. All of you may have known about it. There was a lot of controversy. A lot of us talked and wrote about it. Again, non-historians coming in to play savior, because historians have created gaps in history. And so I think that we really need to call this out for what it is. Complete nonsense by non-specialists who have no understanding or training in history. We reject this kind of history. It is not history. We shouldn't give it that darja. We shouldn't give it that status of history. And finally, the greatest historian, of course, is the person who is ruling us, who wants to hold that symbol of power. I'm sure all of you know what that is. Anybody? That's a Sengol. Yeah. In Tamil Ilakyam, in Tamil literature, there are all of these references to Sengolachi. You look at Purananuru, you look at other texts, you will find these references. Now, what is it talking about basically? It's talking about the transfer of power, or it is talking about somebody who is suited in a monarchical or in a kind of incipient state society. For the Sangam sources, we are still talking of chiefdoms and all. But even when we talk of full-fledged states, it's a state society where monarchy is prevalent. So somebody who is fit, that yogyata he should have to have this Sengol. So Sengolachi means he is also carrying, which in the monarchical view, they have to have a sense of dharma, they have to have a sense of fairness and well-being and martial power. and so on. So this is an image that is there, that is propagated. There's nothing so very uniquely Chola about it, just to be very clear. I may be wrong. I have only worked with on Cholas for about 30 years, but maybe others, the wielders of this, will know better. So in Tamil literature, we don't actually have any physical description of the Sengul. Sengul Archina, it's a concept. It's a concept. How a person translates that concept is different. But you do have sculptures where Shiva is holding a trident, and in one such late Chola image, there is, that trident is shown in this manner. It's like a staff that he is holding it. You have, the artistic imagination is like that. You can imagine it in any way. I may have imagined the scepter differently. Our colonial masters, we thought that they have gained independence from their colonial mindset, but they have not. So when they had the coronation of Charles as king, they wanted to bring back all those symbols. And the whole nation, United Kingdom, was celebrating. BBC had only this as the news. So we are not the only ones who are facing all these crises as far as history is concerned. I don't know if we should feel happy that they are also in that state. But, no brains, honestly, that here we are celebrating monarchy and kingship. 3 days, people are saying, oh, my heart is flowing, my eyes are streaming, seeing him being crowned. Why? Privilege of birth that is being accorded status through putting a crown, which is part of the colonial loot, handing over of a scepter. And monarchies are like that. They rest on the spoils and toil of the masses. And I'm sure you will excuse me if I refer to the great treasures in the Padmanabhapuram temple. Some of us were so happy. Oh, we were so rich. How wonderful. Everything is safe over there. There are snakes guarding it. Nobody can go and count over there because, Shabam will come on us, right? These were the thoughts that were being circulated. How did that come there? He is Ananta Shayana. He is there reclining. He didn't bring it. Who brought it? The kings, their officials, the temple administrators. To put it politely, we can talk of it as the wealth of the temple. If we want to be critical social scientists, we will say this is what comes of the taxation and the impositions on the general public, on traders, on peasants. And that is how this wealth is taken up. Now, to my mind, this symbol is not so simplistically chosen by the current dispensation. It has been very deliberately chosen. And the reason it has been deliberately chosen is because this dispensation, this ideology, has always been uncomfortable with Ashoka. When we talk of great heroes, great rulers, and so on, we do mention Ashoka. And having recently reread all of Ashokan inscriptions for a project I was doing, it again moves me to read those documents. Yes, he is a king. He is also, his power rests on the ability to exploit the labor and toil of people. He himself talks in his edicts of the number of people who are war prisoners who are being taken to work in the estates of the king. But in that same ruler's edicts, we also have references to how a king, any ruler, needs to be compassionate, how any ruler needs to be considerate, how any ruler needs to accommodate diversity, and not just the welfare of people, but welfare of animals, is something that he celebrates in his edicts. When the makers of modern India were looking for symbols, they chose this emblem, which is there on the right, as a very conscious emblem. Because it is not about the power of a person to rule. That chakra symbolizes a wheel of turning, of transformation, which moves away from conquest and temporal power of the kind that kings wield, to a power where any ruler is considerate, is cognizant of the people. And that is why Ashoka then tells his officials, go from house to house, know who the people are, talk to them. Now, Sanjeev Sanyal, whom I mentioned, self-professed historian, economist, banker, says Ashoka is the one who has actually destroyed Indian confidence for the first time. Any blame has to be placed in ancient India for Indians' lack of confidence. And what happened? Because of the way Ashoka behaved, Indians didn't have confidence in 1200 CE when the Muslim invaders came. What did he do? He gave importance to Buddhism. And he severely crushed the Hindus. And this is something they have tried to constantly discuss in public forums about how the anti-Hindu makers of modern India, how Nehru was anti-Hindu. And there are also these fake posts, WhatsApp University has these all the time, of how Nehru is actually, when you look at his genealogy, his father was Muslim, grandfather was Muslim, and so on. They'll have all kinds of names. So he's Muslim. Therefore, he wanted to have an anti-Hindu symbol, and therefore he had the Ashokan emblem. This is what, friends, I would call an ideological agenda that is being pushed as history and revision of history. Thank you.